So before we start, we just want to mention that tonight's Courageous Conversation is a webinar style. So it's not the traditional Zoom. It is going to be webinar style. So you're not going to necessarily be able to see any of the guests. You will be able to see our panelists once they are speaking. In about 10 more seconds, and we are ready to begin.
I identify as a Hispanic American.
Afro-Latina.
Mexican-American.
Chicana.
Mexican.
Afro-Latino.
To my family, I am Puerto Rican. To the country, I am Latina.
Growing up, I felt as though I was too Black to be Latina and too Latina to be Black.
Chicana, I think, identifies more of the political and social values that I hold more than just where my family's from.
I don't feel pressure to be more Latino or American. I'm comfortable with who I am, like culturally.
How can I be Mexican when I'm pressured to be more American? How can I be American when I'm pressured to be more Mexican?
My family, growing up, wanted me to, stick with my Hispanic roots, but also did not want me to show those roots to the world.
A lot of the times people didn't even know that I was Cuban because I guess I don't look like your typical Cuban.
My mom is Mexican, so I've always grown up with her culture, with her language, while being American doesn't come up as easily.
I've gotten people assume, even other Latinos assume that I'm white or that I'm not Latina or Chicana. It definitely hurts, but at the same time, it's not something that I can control. I think I can do my best to project that identity.
It's hilarious when you walk into a room and they don't think you're Caucasian enough, you're not American enough, you're not Latino enough.
Being Latino isn't as accepted as it should be.
So it makes me feel pressured to fit a certain mold here in the United States. But now that I'm older, it's more like, it's what I make of it.
That doesn't stop me from being proud of who I am and where I'm from.
And then ultimately, I think what you settle on is how you view yourself.
We're kind of stripped in a lot of cases of our Spanish tongue and our Spanish heritage and told it's really important that you only speak English.
Because if you're from a Spanish-speaking country and you can't speak Spanish, it's harder for you to connect with the people there.
And not being ashamed when you do speak Spanish, but also not being ashamed if you weren't taught it.
Okay, so Spanish is not my first language because my parents were afraid of me being discriminated against because they were discriminated against. And now they're hurting me because I'm not Latino enough because Spanish is not my first language. But they don't know that I couldn't speak Spanish because my parents were afraid of me getting hurt.
My parents have already done all the work for me. And that's why I feel like I have like a bright future ahead of me because the work's already been done. All I have to do is like harvest what has been put on the ground.
But it's about me and other Afro-Latinos working really hard and continuing to make strides.
I feel like this country has a lot of opportunity for me.
When you have pushed another human being towards the light, towards positivity, towards a voting booth, towards using their power, you are powerful.
People are telling us as Hispanics that we don't belong here. That's kind of motivated us to join together as a Hispanic community and say, we do belong here. And despite what you're saying, I will prove to you why I do belong here. I identify as a
Welcome to our third annual Hispanic Heritage Month Courageous Conversation. If these walls could talk, our stories, our struggles, and our strengths. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening for this important conversation. You've already noticed, because you all are very active in the chat, that the chat feature is open, and we encourage you to share your reflections, your thoughts, your wonderings as we navigate these conversations tonight. We hope that you learn something this evening and that you walk away with new learning and a deeper appreciation for the contributions of our Hispanic Latinx staff members, our students, and our families. Before we move on and continue the conversation, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge our superintendent who registered for the course and who is joining us tonight, as well as we have a couple of board trustees. Some of our trustees are also joining us tonight. I love that as we continue to navigate and have these conversations and navigate education in RISD, that we have our superintendent and our board members and some of our area superintendents and our directors and all of the central staff, because I see central staff on the call tonight as well. But everyone continues to engage in learning. And that's what our Courageous Conversations are about. We have principals on the call tonight. I saw a couple of principal names. And so we're all in this process of learning and deepening our awareness of the students and the families we serve. And so I want to start by going over some session agreements, so that as we navigate this conversation tonight, we're all on the same page. And so tonight, our session agreements are: be present and welcoming, listen deeply to learn. That's really important. We want to make sure that you go ahead and kind of wrap your mind around listening deeply to learn tonight. Expect discomfort. There may be some things that are said that kind of causes some discomfort initially, but we encourage you to lean into that discomfort and ask yourself, what is it about what was just said that's making me feel this way? And really reflect on that. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. Ask yourself, I wonder why she felt that way in that environment. I wonder why he responded the way he just did. Expect and accept non-closure. We are here to introduce you to some new learning from some of our colleagues here in RISD, but please know that you may leave with more questions than answers. And that's okay, because this is a process. Equity is a journey. You know, it's not a destination. So we're always learning. And when we learn, sometimes we leave with more questions to ponder. And then lastly, manage your impact on the room. We know we're virtual, but at the same time, we want to make sure that in the chat, our reflections and our wonderings don't make a negative impact on the room. So manage your impact on the room. I'd like to introduce you to our guest panelists this evening. My light goes out, it's on a timer. Tonight's panelists, we have Dan Barrios. He is from Lake Highlands High School, where he is a CTE teacher. We have Clelia Pena, who is one of our bilingual teachers at Carolyn Bouquet Elementary. And then we have Mr. Jesus Sosa, who is a teacher, a history teacher at Richardson High School. My co-host this evening is Mr. Jeremy Jewett. He is one of the directors in the Department of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Angie Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the Department of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And at this time, I'd like to pull Mr. Jewett forward to continue with tonight's programming.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We're excited to have some really courageous conversations with our panelists. And I'm going to start us off really by getting to know more about ourselves. And so I'm going to post this to all of our panelists. And I guess we can start with you first, Dan. One of the things that we were just fortunate as a department to participate in was the Courageous Conversation National Summit in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that were modeled for us was the indigenous practice of naming place, name, and then intention. And so instead of introducing yourself by your name or your title first, you meet and greet others by introducing your place, then your name, and then your intention there. And so, especially with yesterday being Indigenous Peoples Day, I thought we could start off by kind of practicing that this afternoon. So I'm going to start with my place as McCamey Spring. McCamey Spring is located really about 50 yards from behind the administration building here. And it was a gathering site, a meeting place where different indigenous tribes gathered and exchanged goods and communicated with each other. And so as we think about Indigenous Peoples Day and with Native American History Month next month, this is the place that I'm thinking of, and this is really, really close to where I am now. Again, my name, again, is Jeremy Jewett, and my intention this evening is to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month by honoring and giving space to some of our wonderful Hispanic educators in our school district. And so I'm excited to be here with you all today. And so, Dan, would you mind joining us in naming your place, your name, and your intention as well?
Sure. Thank you for having me and inviting me to be a part of this. My place is the Rio Grande Valley, specifically Brownsville. It's where I spent the first 19 years of my life. It's right where the Rio Grande River meets the Gulf of Mexico in the tip of southern Texas, where my family has been for generations, since when South Texas was still part of Mexico. But my place is also here in Richardson, where I've spent the last 15 years establishing my family and raising my son. My name is Dan Barrios, and my intention is to share my Hispanic experience in celebration and to honor those that have come before me, those that walk alongside me, and those that, and hopefully inspire and maybe create an opportunity for learning for those that come behind me as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Dan. Clelia, would you mind going next for us?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so my place is at Washington Elementary School in the classroom where I was a first-year teacher 15 years ago, where I had no clue what I was doing. I was just told that I needed to teach 75% in English and the rest in Spanish and figure it out. But I was really excited and expectant, and also wanted to meet my 12 students that I was going to receive that day. My name is Clelia Peña, and my intention today is to celebrate that first-year teacher who is here today, and my students throughout the years, and also probably also heal from voices not being heard, and just having my voice be heard today.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that bit of personal history there as well. Jesus, would you mind rounding us out?
All right. Hi, everyone. My place is Chihuahua, Mexico, where I was born, and I got to spend the first 9 years of my life there. Chihuahua, you know, what like Jeremy and Angie said yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day. So like many Latinos, I am mestizo. You know, I'm half European, half Indigenous here of the Americas. So yesterday I did pay tribute to my ancestors, the Ranamuri people from Chihuahua. And but my place is also here in Texas. I've been here since I was 9, 33 now. So most of my life has been in the US. But I did, you know, this place is what shaped me, or, you know, what influenced me to be the person I am today. My name is Jesus Sosa, Jesus Alberto Sosa Ornelas, if we're going by my full legal Mexican name. And my intention today is to share like everyone else, share my experience, listen, learn, and celebrate our cultures, because a lot of times we think Latino just means Mexican, or it just means, whatever, just Spanish. And there's so much more to being Latino than just a language and where you're from.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and really kind of grounding us with your comments there. I want for our next question for our panelists, I really honestly just want to, me personally, just be quiet and give you the floor to share your story. I believe that storytelling is really powerful for our students. And all of us here today are really gathered to learn from you. And so, Dan, would you mind just telling us your story?
Absolutely. Well, I do identify as Tejano. My family has been in South Texas, as I mentioned earlier, since Texas was part of Mexico. I was born about a mile from the Mexican border. And growing up, it was very typical of a lot of people I knew. A lot kind of when we're raised in certain areas, we share similar stories to those we are raised around. My 7th grade year, I was not a great student. My 7th grade year, I switched schools 7 times because I was kicked out of everyone. I was a fighter growing up. Third day of school in 8th grade, got kicked out of school. The man you see now is very, very different than the boy that was growing up in Brownsville. And never in my wildest dreams would I have dreamt of becoming a teacher. Needless to say, it was not an easy or smooth road. I did have a teacher who made a difference in my life. I had a lot of teachers who made a difference. One in particular allowed me to kind of see outside of my surroundings. That started a process, I believe, within me, and allowed me to become a first-generation high school graduate and go on to become a first-generation college graduate, eventually get my MBA. I've spent most of my career in marketing and sales. I'm a 3rd-year teacher, so at 41, I sit here before you as a 3rd-year teacher at Lake Highlands High School. And I was, after a long career in the food industry, I was looking for something that provided a little bit more work-life balance. Something where I wasn't traveling, doing 120 flights a year and doing 200 nights a year in a hotel room. And so I thought I'd try education. Like I said, growing up, it's nothing I would have ever imagined doing. And I'm glad that I made this decision. I've really enjoyed it. But that's just a little bit about my background. I feel that a lot of times we hear about students whose lives were changed and who experienced a rough road, who had run-ins with the law, who had run-ins with schools, but I am here because I was that student. And yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel so seen just hearing you speak about, your beginnings and how many of us can identify with that. And so thank you for sharing a bit of your story. Clelia, would you mind hopping on and sharing and just telling us your story as well?
Okay, well, I was born in Monterrey in Mexico, and I came to the US when I was 16 years old. I came by myself to go to high school. I already knew English because I went to a bilingual school in Monterrey. My mom was a bilingual teacher, but my parents really wanted me to really learn English, and because English is the language of opportunity, right? And so I came with the intention to go back to Mexico, and I wanted to open up a music school because there was not a lot of music schools in Mexico, and I loved music. But after high school, I met some college students, and then I decided to apply for college. And then I stayed here in the US. I actually became a US citizen 4 years ago. So now I consider myself like a true Tex-Mex because I've been half of my life in Mexico. And then actually now it's a little bit more than half in Texas. So I am, I think, the definition of a true Tex-Mex in my definition anyway. And my last year of college, I was taking a class and I was researching what the education system in the US was like. And honestly, I don't even remember why I chose that topic, but I went to actually Washington Elementary School to just check it out, see what they were doing. And I went to a music classroom because that's what I was interested in. And as I was walking to the music classroom, I saw this line of all these Hispanic students walking, and it was like a nonstop line. They were speaking in Spanish and some of them in Spanglish, and that really caught my attention. And so I started just inquiring, and I learned that it was a bilingual classroom. And so from there on, I just, asked to go and check it out. And I realized that there was one teacher who in college had gone to Spain for 1 semester. That was his qualification to be a bilingual teacher. And he had 3 different classrooms. It was third grade and 4th grade together. And so I just offered to help, and I just loved it. And I saw myself in those students. I saw that that they were also immigrants, learning 2 languages at the same time. And that just changed my course. I decided that I wanted to be a bilingual teacher. And so I am glad I am here.
And we're glad you're here as well. Thank you for sharing a bit of your story. All right, Jesus, would you mind unmuting and sharing and just telling your story as well?
So I kind of mentioned this earlier. I moved here when I was 9, and much like a lot of the students that we have here in Texas, really, and the United States, for me, it was not by choice. My parents brought me here undocumented when I was 9, and my parents are, your traditional Latino parents. They go to church every Sunday. They don't like getting in trouble. They want to do everything by the book. But my sister, my younger sister, got really, really sick one day, and to the point where she almost lost her life in Mexico. And the doctors told my parents, okay, you can either go to Mexico City for an experimental procedure that 95% chance is going to leave her paralyzed for life, or you can try to seek medical help in the US. And so my parents, even back in 1998, the immigration system is very much outdated and broken. So my parents made the very difficult decision to move the family here without the proper legal documentation. And so excuse me, when we moved here, thankfully my sister got the right help here at Texas Scottish Rite Hospital for Kids. She's doing well now. She's 31, and I mean, she's still epileptic, but she will take this over her being paralyzed, like they told us in Mexico with the technology over there. So growing up, I'm the oldest of 3 kids, the oldest of all my cousins. So I was always very much aware of my legal status and how that impacted my life. Whereas my little brother and my younger sister, they view themselves as having always been here in this country. So for me growing up, I remember seeing my friends getting their driver's license. And for me, I wasn't able to do that, or, them getting their first job and I couldn't get a job because I didn't have a social. Thankfully, though, Texas did allow undocumented students. Back in 2001, Texas was one of the first states in the country to let undocumented students who graduated from Texas go to college. And I was able to go, and, thankfully I got my bachelor's, I got my master's, I'm working on my doctorate right now. So all of this wouldn't have been possible had my parents not made that very difficult decision to move us here, as a lot of people say, without the proper procedures. Now, I don't blame my parents because the legal system, right now I am married to a US citizen, so I'm going through the proper work to get my my permanent residency, and I do want to become a citizen one day. But it's a lot of money. Right now I've spent so far about 10 to 15,000 in lawyer fees and US fees. And I've been waiting since like June 2020 for my appointment to go back to Juarez so I can, beg for forgiveness and let them, ask them to give me a green card. And if you're wondering, well, how's this guy working legally here? Well, President Obama did pass an executive order in 2012 called Deferred Action for Deferred, it's DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And which right now that one's still in limbo, even 10 years later. But because of that, I have been able to pay $500 every 2 years. I renew my my card, and I show them that I'm paying my taxes, I'm being a productive member of society. So all of these things, the reason I'm sharing all of this with you is because I do see a lot of what I went through and what my students go through, especially here teaching in the high school level. I'm seeing kids sometimes who came here on their own, much like Lelia did. They came here on their own, and their mom and dad, their families are back home. I had a student today who broke down in front of me. They're not doing well academically, and I asked them what's going on, and they share their story. They miss home. They don't know the language here. And I think it brings me a little bit more, I can sympathize with them more a little bit than teachers who haven't gone through this, to know that, yes, everybody wants to do it the right way, but it's not always possible. So this kid is here, 16 years old, living on his own. I mean, not on his own, but, family's not here. So my story is not unique to me, and it's not unique to, my student. It's actually very common with a lot of people here in the US. So I'm hoping that, people become more aware that, when you hear on the news that, anytime you hear somebody saying illegal aliens, there's a negative connotation to that. Because it doesn't matter what news channel, what news source you're looking at, they're all going to have a bias that they're looking at the news from. But hopefully if you see a face put into this, you see that, undocumented people are not scary. So that is my story.
Thank you, Jesus, for sharing your story. And like you mentioned, really sharing the story of a lot of our students as well. And so we're so thankful that you're here and that many of our students have you to look at and to look up to. So thank you for sharing your story. And I want to pose this question right back to you, Jesus. Today, our Courageous Conversation is really in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. And I just want to ask our panelists, why is Hispanic Heritage Month important? And how is this month an opportunity for all of us, whether or not we're Hispanic or not?
So I teach a lot of ESL kids, and I also teach Mexican American Studies here. And one of the first questions I ask them week one is, what is the biggest misconception that people have about you? For the ones that do identify as Latino. And 90% of the time, they're all going to tell me that I'm from Mexico. And at least here in Richardson High School, we do have a large percentage of students who are from Central America. So Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, getting a lot of people from Venezuela, had a few people from Colombia, Peru. So it is very much not just Mexico. And we tend to think, oh, it's the border, it's going to be Mexico. And for the most part, it is. But this is why I am so glad that we spend, part of the year looking at the variety of Latinos, right? Because even the term, I don't use the term Hispanic anymore. And that's just a personal choice because I think it does try to erase a lot of my indigenousness and focuses strictly on the Spanish part of me, which I'm not ashamed of, but there's two parts to me, right? So much like a lot of the Latinos, not everybody's going to look like me. You're going to have Afro Latinos, you're going to have students with curly hair and darker skin, and you're going to have some very white Latinos with with blonde eyes. And wow, I'm all over the place, guys. With blonde hair and blue eyes. So Latinos, this is an opportunity to, just show that We're not just all one single group, right? Just like African Americans, they don't always think the same, or white people or Asian people. There's very much diversity, even within all these ethnicities and racial groups.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that and really conveying the spirit of our opening video, just to show the many different perspectives and experiences of Hispanic Latinx people. So thank you for sharing that. Dan, would you mind also speaking to the importance of this month and why it's an opportunity for all of us?
Sure. Well, I think it's a great opportunity to reflect and honor those that have, the culture, a culture that's made so much impact in our country and in our community. Along with what Jesus said, it's about diversity. There are many different nationalities and backgrounds and cultures and traditions that go along with being Hispanic or Latino or Tejano or another term that we may use to identify ourselves. And it's important to see the variety. It doesn't come from a singular root. And seeing that variety and having the opportunity to experience and listen, not just for us, those of us who consider ourselves Hispanic or Latino, but for those that are not from the same cultural background, to see that as well and have that opportunity to experience that, to not see us from a different perspective, maybe just from a slightly different light, and a little bit more, maybe bring us a little more into the light to allow to see a little bit us a little more whole, I guess the way of saying it, seeing a bigger part of who we are and the differences and how we are different. I have heard comments that similar to what Jesus has said about people saying, well, it's just celebrating Mexico. Well, no, there's a lot. Even within Mexico, it's very, very diverse. It's a huge country. Then you start adding your Central American, your Caribbean, your South American, and there's a lot of diversity that comes in that. So I think it's a beautiful and great opportunity to learn.
I love that. Thank you for saying that. And I think something that we've noticed just over the years as we continue to celebrate Heritage Months throughout the district, we've seen more and more campuses begin to show even more of that diversity within these different communities that we're celebrating. So thank you for speaking to that. Ms. Clay, would you mind also speaking to us about why this month is important and how this is an opportunity for all of us in the district and beyond to continue to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month?
Yes. With this question, I was thinking about when I first started teaching, and if you ask kids who are important people in history or people that we study in school, for no doubt you will hear just George Washington, maybe Albert Einstein, if Martin Luther King, maybe if you're lucky, Rosa Parks too. But now, I remember when I was teaching second grade, and one of the TICs was that students were to study leaders in the community and leaders in the community and in their world. And Cesar Chavez was not part of that list at that time. And I remember just getting a book on Cesar Chavez, and my students didn't know who he was. And I was learning alongside them, because remember, I was an immigrant. I didn't go to school here. So I was learning who Cesar Chavez was as well. And I remember reading about Cesar Chavez with my students. It was a storybook. And in one of the pages, Cesar Chavez was in class, and the teacher had reprimanded him because he was speaking in Spanish. And he was sent to the corner of a room and look at the wall because he was speaking in Spanish and he was not allowed to speak Spanish. And I thought I had previewed the book, but I wasn't ready to read that. And when I read that, my students, Like I like my voice broke a little bit. Some students were like, wow, like I can see myself in that. Like I am so glad that we are a bilingual classroom, that we can speak Spanish and we can speak English. And so for me, like first and it's important for my students and for me to see us in history, so that my students know the names of Cesar Chavez, of Judge Sonia Sotomayor, that they know Ellen Ochoa, even like Lin-Manuel Miranda, like newer names. I love that. But then also we think about like everybody else. I want us to be part of the norm. I don't want to say, oh, this Hispanic judge or this Hispanic artist or this Hispanic activist. I want to say this great activist, this great judge, this leader. And I want for students to be able, all colors of students, all cultures, to be able to say, when we talk about who are the people that you study in school, that we are doing that all throughout. And so I think that being intentional about having Heritage Months, specifically in this case, Hispanic Heritage, it forces us as teachers in a way, you know, not forcing, but it forces us to look at that, to look at those books, at those stories, to have those pictures. When you were talking about like all the countries, like not only see Mexican flags, but like I think about my hallway right now, there's flags of all the colors, and my students were to like look up what are the colors of the flag in Cuba or Venezuela or El Salvador, not just the flags of where they're from. So I think that's why we get to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that and really grounding us this evening about why we're here and the benefit and the impact on our students who get those windows and mirrors. They get to not only learn more about other cultures, but also learn more about themselves for many of our students as well. Angie.
Wow, you all have me over here taking notes, and I usually don't take notes during our conversations, but I'm listening and I'm like, oh, that's a little nugget for me to write down and come back and reflect on. Wow, it's been a great conversation so far. Before we move into our struggles, because this is kind of a good transition to go into the talking about our struggles. We just talked about our stories, and now we're going to move to our struggles part of the conversation. And I want to go back to something Jesus said a little bit ago, where he said, he acknowledged, I don't refer to myself as Hispanic. I refer to myself as Latino. And Jesus, I just want to lift that up a little bit and let you know, because you weren't with us back then. But for those of you who have been kind of trekking along with us for a few years now, you'll remember that was our very first Hispanic Heritage Month Courageous Conversation. It was how do you, I can't remember how we titled it, but it was about labels and Hispanic versus Latino versus Latinx. And we had a wonderful conversation that night about how people label us and how we are now starting to take ownership of how we label ourselves under this umbrella of labels. And you brought in the comparison, just like African-American versus being called Black. And so, but we brought all of that to the table and really unpacked that night. So thank you for lifting that up again. And so as we move to our next session on our struggles, Claylia, I'm going to throw this question out at you. You shared a little bit about your story already with us. And now I want to ask you, why is it important for you as a Hispanic educator to tell your story? And why is it important for school districts to listen? And when I say school districts, I'm talking about your colleagues, your administrator, our superintendent, our board of trustees. Why is it important for school districts to listen? And do you think that school districts have always listened to Hispanic voices?
Okay, I'm going to write one word that came to mind, but I'm going to bring it up in a little bit. But so one thing that I wanted to share with you guys in this part that is is part of my struggle, is that, and I want to share with you guys, just like I shared earlier, that I started in the classroom 15 years ago, fresh out of college, with a lot of energy and excitement as a bilingual teacher. 3 years into that, I went to start to get my master's at SMU in bilingual education, and I just loved it. And I was advocating and collaborating and educating, and I was in a place where there was not a lot of Hispanic educators. We were in bilingual schools. I've always been a bilingual educator, but I was one of very few, and it was very lonely, and it was hard, and I was always speaking up and asking and sharing and educating. And it got to a point at year 10 that I was very tired and burned out from that. I would come home and cry. I'm like, why do I care? Like, why is this important? And I remember always thinking of the word like urgency, like they don't understand my urgency. Like, my students need this education, like it's life or death. And when I would bring that up to administrators or other people, I think they just thought that I was crazy. In fact, I had a former boss said, you're not the typical Mexican. You should take that as a compliment. You should just be quiet and do what people say. And I remember, like, I was called a pot stirred. I was called so many things, and I was advocating for my students and for my fellow bilingual teachers. And I actually quit education. I decided to step out of education because I was really burned out. But it's in my blood. It's in my skin. I came back. I came back. I don't know exactly why or how, but I came back, and it's been with full force, and I am healing from that. And I learned that my voice needed to be heard. And so I think it is important to tell our story, because as a Latina and as a Hispanic teacher, my student voices need to be heard as well. And if I don't speak up, then they won't feel like they are able to speak up as well. And you know what? I came back because I had mentors and I had other friends and teachers that were like, you need to come back and you need to use your voice. And so I am glad I came back, and I found a place in Richardson. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing. That's why this is a courageous conversation, because I know that some of what you all have already shared with us tonight is deeply personal. And one of the things that I just heard you say is that I'm still healing. And sometimes I think it's hard for us to wrap our minds around, we have harmed staff members and students in education, right? And there's healing to be done from the harm that we've endured. And so thank you for saying that. And thank you for putting that out there. And I hope that tonight, what you leave from this courageous conversation with Clelia is that we're on this journey with you. And we are here, and we want to help you heal. We want to help reconcile a lot of the harm that has been done through the years. And we're glad that you're back. We're glad that you made the choice to come back to education, because you're absolutely right. There are so many students who need you, right? And there's still so much work to do, and you are here fighting the good fight. So thank you for coming back. This next question, I'm going to come to you, Jesus, and it's a long question, so stay with me. This is a quote from the article, so hopefully all of you were able to read the article that was attached to the announcement for this courageous conversation. So, quote, "Yet despite all of their strengths, There were a number of challenges for Latino teachers. They were often stereotyped as being inferior teachers or viewed in a limited way as good teachers for Latino students only. This often created situations in which these teachers needed to prove their worth, end quote. Jesus, as a Hispanic teacher, as a Latino teacher, would you say you've been stereotyped on any occasion? And if so, how did that make you feel? And describe the occurrence if you're willing to.
By the way, if other people refer to me as Hispanic, I'm not offended. There's a lot of worse things that I've been called, and Hispanic is not even in those. So I have been stereotyped, but not by staff members and not by teachers. It's by my students, surprisingly. A lot of times, they'll see me. Sometimes I have my beard longer, and so they see me and they think, oh, this guy's probably going to be mean. He's probably going to be strict. He's probably going to be, very difficult and understanding. And then once they get to know me, they're like, you are not what I thought you were going to be, because they think I'm going to be, very much like a lot of my ancestors were, very much machistas, very male dominating mentality that, that everybody has a place. And I do believe that everybody has a place, but I think that we're all welcomed and, and that we all belong. So I do make the effort to show my students that I genuinely do care about them. And I tell them, like some of them will tell me, how do you feel about this political topic or that? I tell them it doesn't matter what I think. I'm like, but your views are entitled because you came up with them on your own. A lot of them, because I'm from Mexico and a lot of my students are from Central America, a lot of them unfortunately have faced discrimination in Mexico, when they're making their journey up here to the US. And I do acknowledge that. And I tell them, I'm sorry, if my fellow Mexicans back home were disrespectful or if they were rude to you, but I promise you, I'm not like that. I want to see you succeed. And for a lot of them, it does take a little bit of time to build that trust. And obviously it's not going to be like they're treated horribly in Mexico all the time, but you are just like in the US, you are going to have some people that view migrants and immigrants as a threat. They see them as somehow disrupting their everyday life. And so I tell the kids, if you're from El Salvador, tell me about your family, tell me about what your family cooks, because the only thing I know about El Salvador is that they make awesome pupusas, or I learned about baleadas from my my Honduran and my Guatemalan kids, because both of them love them. And then I've been learning about arepas. So I do learn a lot from my kids, and I don't think they realized that I was going to be so open-minded. And I tell them, I view you guys as if you guys were my family. I spend more time with you than I do back home with my loved ones. So I do want to make sure that, that they know that I'm not here to get onto them unless they're being disruptive to not only themselves, but to the class. So, but thankfully though, I have very supportive staff members and teachers here who they do acknowledge that even though I do, a lot of the ESL kids do come to me, I also have, a lot of the white kids, a lot of the Black kids. I have a lot of Asian kids, and then who do come to me for help. And then ESL is not only my, Latin American students, it's also, I have students from Vietnam. I had some from Thailand. I had some from Ethiopia. So again, they might think, oh, this guy's only going to be, spending all his time talking about how great Mexico is. But I genuinely do want to know about my kids' background, because that's going to help me become better aware of, where they're coming from. And that's going to help me but guide the conversation in a way that's going to be more culturally relevant to them than, viewing it from my own perspective.
Thank you for answering that for us, Jesus. And I think one of the things that resonated with me as you were speaking is the importance, if we truly want to build relationships with students, sometimes it's important to just recognize the stereotype, or that stereotype threat, acknowledge it, and then break through that. And so sometimes for teachers of color, that may be something that we have to open ourselves up to as well with our students in order to build relationships, but in order for students to come into, our classrooms and receive us well, right? Had you not shared that, I wouldn't have even thought about some of the things that you just talked about, as far as if they're, if some of our students who are coming from these different countries are coming through Mexico, some of the experiences that they may have had and what they bring to the classroom with them, as far as when they see you, what they may think. But to get them to open up is to recognize that and to kind of start to bring down their defenses around that based on their previous experiences. And so, Dan, I want to come over to you and ask, do you feel you've ever had to assume a different identity in order to be perceived or received in a better way by staff, students, or parents?
I do not feel that I've had to pursue or take on a different identity, but this question does remind me of a scene in the movie, in Selena, the movie, where AB, the father, is driving in the van with Selena and everybody. And he's talking about how being Mexican American, you have to be more Mexican than Mexicans and more American than Americans. So while it's not taking on a different identity, it is this kind of line you walk, and you're kind of teeter-tottering between both sides of the line. Sometimes you have to walk this side, sometimes you have to walk the other side of the line. Recently, we had a meet the teacher night. And I will say, within 10 minutes, I went from, having a conversation about traveling heavily in sales with one father to, speaking to another father and talking about Mexican movies, and we're talking Spanish, and we're talking about Pedro Infante and these great Mexican artists. So while I don't take on a different identity, I do sometimes catch myself saying, okay, and part of it's speaking to your audience, part of it's, you connect with different people in different ways, just like you and I may connect on one level, and Jesus and I may connect on a different level. It doesn't mean I'm a different person with you, no, but at the same time, there is that kind of back and forth. You find yourself, and as a Tejano and a Latino, a Hispanic, and I do accept all of those. I find myself doing that and catching myself doing that sometimes. Absolutely.
So we would call that code switching. Black culture calls that code switching. And that's a term that is kind of caught on with other, cultures as well, because we find ourselves having to code switch depending on the audience, and just the context of where we are and what we're doing. So thank you for sharing that, Dan. Claylia, I'm going to come back to you. And our Hispanic students make up almost 40% of our student population here in RISD. So by far, the largest demographic group is going to be our Hispanic students. And generally speaking, school districts across the country have lagged behind in hiring more Hispanic teachers and staff. Do you think that's true here in Richardson? And why do you think that is something that persists in this continuous lagging behind of hiring Hispanic teachers and staff? And then what should we do to make our district more attractive to existing and aspiring Hispanic teachers?
I think that there's several issues that we can see in that. One is certification, language as well. And just also what came to mind was I remember not in this district, in another district, I had a great candidate that would have been a great teacher. And when she was interviewed, they're like, "Oh, but she has an accent. Like, we don't want our students to be exposed to that." And like, that kind of perception towards Hispanic, Latino, bilingual teachers, that, we missed out on a great teacher. In fact, she went to another district and was great. Now, this was not for Richardson, I want to clarify, but now I do want to say that right now I am at a bilingual school in Richardson, Carolyn Bouquet Elementary. We are more than 85% bilingual. The majority of the teachers are bilingual teachers. We have I'm a fourth grade teacher, so I'm one of 3 bilingual teachers that I get to collaborate. So I am home right now. Like, I love, like, I have I love that I have 2 Latina principals. I love that my coaches are bilingual and Latinas, and that I can text them in Spanglish and English and whatever language comes in the moment and how I'm feeling. They understand my students. I don't have to explain that. So I love that. I want to acknowledge that. And this is probably and the reason why I'm back and I am healing, and I love it. But that hasn't been the norm. I've worked in 5 different elementary schools, and I was one of the only bilingual teacher in the grade level. So it was very hard to collaborate, and it's very lonely as a Latina and as a bilingual teacher. It was very lonely. And so I do think that I don't know, we have 40, like, when you think about the math, and I'm not a math teacher, I'm a reading teacher, but when I think about the math, like, and I don't know if any math teachers are there, but you can correct me, but like, if 40% of our students are Hispanic and they're going through our schools, they're going to graduate, and some of them are going to be teachers. Like, why are we still, like, Hispanic teachers, we don't see more Hispanic teachers, right? And so I think that, again, is going back to changing the perception of Hispanics as, pobrecitos, or they don't know English. And as we change that, then maybe we'll see more professionals. Now, I do have to say that when I moved to Richardson, I was so excited. I moved so my son, my oldest son, will go to a bilingual school. And also I wanted him to be able to be around more diversity. And we've loved it. We've lived here for 4 years. And I remember going to the bank the first time to, open my account, and the bankers were Hispanic. And I was like, and bilingual. And I was like, oh my goodness, you are Hispanic, you're bilingual. Thank you. And we can Spanglish. And I was like, and I commended him, and I said, speak to your children in Spanish. And then I went to the grocery store, and I saw Hispanics, and I was like, I was just really excited. And so I think that the more we see professionals around us, the more we'll be able to open that. I do think it is a problem. We want to see ourselves in all the professions. And honestly, I have to add that it starts also, like, in movies and in books. Like, when you think about movies, like, where do you see the Hispanics? Like, when you think of a traditional teacher, who is the teacher in the movies? Is a white female with, like, the sweater and, like, and everything matching. Like, that is not me. I mean, I love to match, but that, and so I think that it has to change in our media. It's going to have to change it in what we read and what our students are seeing, and expose them to that, so that the whole community changes. So that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for, again, just bearing your heart. And one takeaway that I want you to hear me say that I'm leaving that question with is that you have called Richardson Independent School District, but also the city of Richardson collectively home. And we are so glad that you now feel like you are home. I think I saw someone put that in the chat. And so we just want to welcome you again, welcome you home. And so
I do feel like home. Thank you.
And now I'm going to toss it back to you, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just a huge shout out to everyone in the chat sharing their experiences, really just giving some kudos to our wonderful panelists as well. Thank you all to everyone that was able to join us this evening. And we're going to start to really kind of go towards our final segment that's going to focus on our strengths. And I want to start this question with you, Dan. How do you honor culture in your classroom? And why is it important to honor our cultures daily throughout the school year beyond just the Heritage Months?
Sure. I think the best way I can honor my culture is being my true self. Being myself, being transparent, authentic, sometimes vulnerable to my students, to my colleagues. In doing so, I believe that shows authentic leadership. And in doing that, and showing the authentic leadership, being the person I was created to be, being the person that I have grown to be, really honors my culture. So I think having a deep understanding of who I am and walking in that daily in front of my students, my colleagues, and nurse my culture.
I love that. Thank you. And just honoring who you are and being willing to share that in front of students. And I love that, just being vulnerable in front of them. Jesus, what about for you? Just that same question. How do you honor your culture in your classroom, and why is it important for us to honor cultures throughout the district in our classrooms beyond just Heritage Months?
So I went on Amazon my first year. We don't get teachers don't get an allocation for decorations, so everything has to, a lot of the stuff that we have is from our own pockets. So my first year teaching, I told the kids, this classroom is going to get better every year because I'm just starting out now. So I just bought a lot of flags. I'm like, I teach geography. I can, have the kids guess where their flag is, which one's which, and they loved it. And so I took that, and the next year I made a wall of places where my ESL students come from, and I have not only the Latin American ones, but I have the ones from that come in from the African continent, the Asian continent. I haven't had any European students yet, but the moment I get them, I'm gonna go and order a flag just because I want them to be seen, and to to see that I'm acknowledging where they're coming from, because I promise you they will feel like, I know that we all care, but a lot of times the students want to see you physically doing something to acknowledge who they are. So this year I have the privilege of having a student from Brazil. And so I'm taking Duolingo and Babbel, and I'm trying to learn some little bit of Portuguese. The other day I said tudo bem to him, and he's like, oh, he started talking to me in Portuguese. I'm like, okay, that's all I know. And then he laughed. So it's little things like that, even if it's just, Hispanic Heritage Month. The reason it's held in this time of month is because so many of the Latino countries have their Independence Day around this time. Not all of them, because some of them are in like July, some of them are after the fact. But for the most part, if you go and pick a date early on during Hispanic Heritage Month, you're going to find that a lot of them share it. So they love, when I bring up, tell me about your country, even if it's just asking them, what did you do? You're going to have the kids who typically don't say anything, speak up, because they are very proud of their cultures. And even if it's not just, ethnicity or racial stuff, last year during Ramadan, I had a student who, obviously, Muslim. I had no idea that he couldn't eat, because I knew during Ramadan they couldn't eat until sundown. But once it ended, I'm like, okay, man, come on, we're trying Japanese next because we're talking about Asia. And he said, oh, I can't have that. It's not halal. So that, opened my eyes to a whole nother thing. I'm like, okay, I hadn't considered, everything that goes with that, because culture, again, it's not just the language. It's not the way you look. It's pretty much everything that bases your identity. So just showing your kids that you care about them, even if it's just, trying to say something in their language, it's going to make a big difference, because a lot of times these kids think, oh, the teacher doesn't even say my name right, which is one of the lessons that we're doing here with the district. just getting to know their name rights, a lot of times will make the kid want to come into your class because they know that you do take the time to know them better.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. And what Jesus is mentioning is our district-wide Equity is a Verb campaign. And we started the year off, and I should say that this campaign really asked the district to focus on one action for each month. And our first action was just understanding and pronouncing each other's names correctly. And so asking if we didn't know, and making sure that that's something that we're aware of and how important our names are, and just having that intentional effort. And it's really, really cool, Jesus, to hear you talk about your intentionality with not only just pronouncing names, but learning more about your students and incorporating that into your classroom, whether it's the lessons, it's the decorations. And so I'm so excited to have you here to share that. And I hope all of us are taking notes about some ideas about how to extend the learning that we're doing in Heritage Months throughout the school year. And so, although Hispanic Heritage Month technically is going to end on the 15th, it doesn't have to end with the learning. It doesn't have to end with the celebrations. It doesn't have to end with the acknowledgement of the students who are right here in our classrooms and in our buildings. So thank you for saying that. And I'm going to open this next question up to everyone. Our pre-read talked about language and its impact on Hispanic educators in a variety of ways. And as was mentioned earlier, about 40% of our student population is Hispanic. And furthermore, most of our emergent bilingual students in RISD are Hispanic Spanish speakers. So opening this up to everyone, and we can start with you, Clelia. How has language impacted you personally, your career as an educator or your community as a whole?
There's a quote by Gloria Anzaldúa that says that ethnic identity is twin skin to linguistic identity. And I think that we are as Latinos, like our language as well, and it comes hand with hand. Even if a lot of our generations of Hispanics that grew up in the US don't feel comfortable with English because they lost it. Like we saw in the video at the beginning with Gina Rodriguez from Jane the Virgin, that she's like, my parents harmed me by not teaching me Spanish, but they were trying to protect her from racism, from everything else, right? And so I do believe that for us, Spanish is our identity as well. And so, of course, I am a bilingual teacher. I believe that into my bones. And in fourth grade, when they come, my students in fourth grade are starting to realize that their duality of their identity, kind of like Dan was talking, like not that they had to conform to something, but that there's two identities within them, like their biculturalism and their bilingualism in them. And unfortunately, they learn again through media and through everything that is around us that maybe Spanish is lower than English, that maybe Spanish is a dirty language and English is the good language to have. And if they're in ESL classes, that is a bad thing because they don't know enough English. Or if in fourth grade, we decide also what language are they going to take the STAR in. And so if they're taking it in English, they must be smarter than the ones who are taking it in Spanish. And it's not true. It's their right to take the STAR in the language that they're the strongest at. We do what is best for children. And so for me, like I love that Hispanic Heritage Month is at the beginning of the school year, because I get to share with my students how important it is that duality comes with their language. And so we talk about how it's important that, yes, we speak English and it's great and we love English and we love our Spanish as well. I'm hearing a echo with me, so I'm going to stop and I'll let somebody else talk because I'm getting confused with myself.
Dan, how about you? Would you mind speaking to that, just understanding and sharing with us how language has impacted you personally, your career as an educator or your community as a whole?
Sure. So language is extremely important, as Clelia was saying. You know, when I speak to students, they say, "Sir, where were you born?" I said, "Brownsville, Texas." Like, where was your parents born? I said, "Brownsville, Texas." Well, what about your grandparents? I said, "Texas." And my grandmother was born and raised in South Texas, in what is now San Benito. And at the same time, she died when she was 93 years old. And from the day she was born to the day she died, she never learned a word of English because she was so tied to the language was so part of the culture. And in Rio Grande Valley, that's not unheard of for people to be born and raised in this country and never learn English because the language is so tied to the culture. And professionally, before I became an educator, I worked in Hispanic markets. It's what I did. So it's been a huge benefit in my career. And now as an educator, you know, I'm meeting parents and talking to parents on the phone that said, I had one cry with me about a week and a half ago over the phone. She was crying because she had never been able to communicate with the teacher. And here we're serving, I believe the number was 40%. And we have a student who's in high school whose parent feels they've never been able to communicate to a teacher. From a culture that has high regards for teachers and educators. So being bilingual absolutely is a huge benefit. It has greatly impacted my career part of education. It's greatly impacted my relationship with students. There's a connection there. And it comes as a benefit on campus. I help translate for 504s, APs, you know, art meetings, various campus events. You know, when parents show up and they don't know where to go, I'm giving directions in Spanish. It's a huge connection. And it's, I believe, you know, big ways we connect is language, food, and faith, you know. And language is one that I have deeply embraced. But also because I see my mother was a, you know, different generation. She's in her mid-70s now. And she was that generation where they were taught, don't embrace the language, because if you want to get a job, don't embrace the culture. Because if you want to get a job, you have to act as white and as American as possible. People in my generation are able to say, look, we can embrace both cultures. We can embrace this biculturalism and be successful and experience the best of both worlds.
Thank you for sharing that. And it reminds me of a story that we share in one of our trainings of a parent talking about, you know, losing, feeling as if they're losing their child as that language barrier between them and their child grows. As the parent speaks about speaking Spanish and their child not knowing Spanish, and how, you know, things like stories that we tell each other and pass down, these are things that are deeply tied to us personally, and how as long as we prioritize certain languages over others, there are lots of loss that take place there in terms of our cultures, in terms of our family histories and who we are. Jesus, I can wrap that question up with you. Anything you're willing to share about how language has impacted you personally, how it's impacted your career as an educator, or your community as a whole?
Definitely. So, you know, Spanish is my first language. And when I came to the US, I didn't speak a word of English. So I went to, when I came to the US, I came to Sherman, Texas, you know, way up north, almost Oklahoma. And I went to the quote unquote Hispanic school, where most of the Latino kids went to. But even though the demographics are kind of similar to here in Richardson High School, where there's a lot of, you know, majority Hispanic students, they weren't allowed to speak Spanish with me. And I remember just how intimidating and how scared I was back then, because they, you know, they wouldn't talk to me during class, and the teacher didn't speak Spanish. So the only time they would talk to me in Spanish was during recess and somewhere where the teacher couldn't hear us. And they were like, look, we like you, but we don't want to get in trouble in class. So we're just going to talk in English. Just try your best. So this forced me to go and, you know, go home and read. Like literally, I would grab a book, a children's book, and I would grab my dictionary in English and Spanish, and I would translate it so I could figure out what it was. I think that's what helped me learn English so quick. So So when I look at my kids now, I struggle and I was 9. So I see my kids coming here, 14, 15, 16, 17 sometimes. And they tell me, Mister, I'm never going to learn English, or this is hard. I'm like, look, you're trying, you already speak a language. I'm like, whatever you learn, it's going to be a plus, it's going to be a bonus for you. And they're like, well, what if people laugh at me? I'm like, well, let them laugh. I'm like, you're learning 2 languages. How many languages do other people speak? Because unfortunately, the United States, we still treat, having an accent as if it's a bad thing. That shows that you have more than one language within you. So this is, growing up like that. I mean, even up in Sherman, I had a lady one time who my dad and I were speaking in Spanish. My dad speaks English, broken English, but still, he understands, he can speak it. He and I were talking in Spanish. This old lady turned around and she said, we were here first. I'm like, excuse me? She's like, we were here first. You guys need to learn our language. So I went off on her and I told her, I'm like, lady, this used to be part of Mexico. Spanish is more native to this land than English is. I'm like, and then she's like, oh, you speak English? I'm like, I do. She's like, well, learn your history. I'm like, okay, well, I will. But you need to learn it too, because nobody except the indigenous people are native here. So all of these things help me, be more aware of when I do see a student that's self-conscious, just embrace them and tell them, don't look at your accent as a bad thing. It's a sign of courage. You're learning something else that not a lot of people are able to do in this country. So, and the same goes for the kids who are Latino. And I'm seeing a lot of the comments here in the chat. A lot of kids who don't speak Spanish fluently. And I tell the same thing to my Mexican-American studies students. I'm like, the fact that you don't speak Spanish does not make you any less Latino than me, does not make you any less Latino than somebody who live in Mexico. Because we don't do the same thing for other ethnicities, right? There's people who don't speak a word of German, but they're out there celebrating Oktoberfest or, St. Patrick's Day in March. And these are things that come from our past, our heritage. So I tell them, the fact that you are trying to learn about the culture already shows that you care more than the average person. And that already, you wanting to claim that title, like Angie said earlier, you're choosing your title, your identity. That I tell them, don't ever let anybody tell you you're not anything less than, because you are who you are. So.
I love that. I love that. Thank you, Jesus, for sharing that and always really centering and empowering students. And I love the way that you speak about that and how important that is, because our students are our future, like literally. And we, want our students to graduate from Richardson ISD empowered, but also sure of who they are and proud of who they are. And with that in mind, we're going to come to our last question. And we kind of have about 9 minutes or so. So our panelists, I really want us to keep that in mind as we kind of start to wrap up. And really, before I really tell us the question, I just want to say that we thought and we planned this question because we've heard over the years from some other educators, especially educators of color, that although they are proud of their heritage, they've survived in education and in RISD by shrinking themselves sometimes. And so as we wrap up, what is your joy? How does joy resonate within you for who you are? And I can start with you, Dan.
Sure. Thank you. And I forgot to mention earlier, I apologize if my voice sounds a little weird this evening. I've been fighting a sinus infection bed all weekend. So I apologize for my voice. Joy. My joy comes when I'm able to connect with students and allow them to see outside of their own circumstances. And whether that's a connection they make with me because of my previous experience prior to becoming an educator, because I'm a male educator who's also Latino, or whatever that may be, that joy truly comes with making those connections, allowing somebody to see outside of where they're at, because the world is so much bigger than what's around us and what we see within our homes on a daily basis. And that's where I get my joy. And that's where get my joy knowing that if I could connect with a student in that way, we could be a part of the future successes of our community, our culture, and of our ISD as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing that. Jesus, what about you? For you, what is your joy, and how does joy resonate within you for who you are?
So for me, joy is and it's cliche because I mean, you ask any teacher, they're all going to tell you it's the kids, and it really is. We don't go into this for the money. You know, and I left the corporate world where I was making probably around the same as this, but a whole lot less work. But you know, here I'm happy to see that, you know, if I can help one kid succeed, I'm gonna be, you know, I'm gonna be good with the work that I did. But thankfully, you know, these kids, a lot of times if they see somebody who reminds them of them, right? Their mom, their dad, their brother, whoever, hopefully that will inspire them. So, you know, teachers like us, people of color, male teachers, LGBT teachers, you know, people who are not the traditional teachers, I think a lot of the reason that students don't even consider this careers because they think it's only for, you know, the main demographic, which is white females. So again, seeing my kids succeed and seeing them be happy with the environment they're in, the lessons that they're learning, and just succeeding, that brings me joy more than anything else.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your joy. And Clelia, we can wrap up with you. For you, what is your joy, and how does joy resonate within you for who you are?
So at CBE, we receive a lot of newcomers, students who just came from their countries that flee for different reasons that we already kind of talked about. There's a lot of gaps in language, in education, academics, social, and it's really hard. It's really hard as an educator and as a human to see all of that. But my joy, and it might be a weird joy, but in the mornings, we recite the Pledge of Allegiance every single morning. And at the beginning of the year, my students usually do not know it. And so we practice it and we practice it. And a lot of them don't speak English, but by now they're already reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. And when they say with their beautiful accents and their beautiful brown skins, with liberty and for liberty and justice for all, like that is my joy in the morning, because that is what it is. It's liberty and justice for all. That's why they're here. That's why I show up. And that's why I think that's what education is. So that is my joy.
I'm gonna just sit with that for a little bit, Angie.
I was about to say the exact same thing. I need to just sit with that for a minute. Wow. Thank you. Thank you all. I really want to ask our participants tonight, because one of the things that Jeremy led this question by saying is that we asked this question because over the years, we've heard educators, specifically educators of color, who are proud of their heritage, but admit they've survived in education and in RISD by shrinking themselves. And so I just want to challenge all of you to find your joy, find your why for teaching, and show up every day for that joy and that why. But I want to challenge our participants to really allow those around you to just really be, you know, their full and authentic selves. So, you know, if you allow your next door neighbor to just show up to work and be his or be her full and authentic self, so that so many of our educators, you know, do not feel like they have to come to work and shrink themselves, because that's exhausting. You know, that in and of itself is exhausting when you have to shrink yourself just to be in a space. So as we wrap up the conversation, I just want to say one more time, we decided to canvas and find teachers who were willing to come and share this space with us tonight, because guys, we know you're in the trenches, you're boots on the ground, you are doing the hard work, and we want to celebrate you all during a time when educators are taking a lot of heat and just for various things, right? We wanted to be able to give you a platform, during Hispanic Heritage Month, but also as teachers. So I want everyone to notice that we only invited teachers to this space because teachers' voices are important as well. What you experience and endure, what you go through. Jesus said, I left corporate, but honestly, I'm doing a lot more work, right? And we all can, that resonates with all of us as educators, that it's a hard career. It's if you come to work to really do the work, it's tough. And so as we wrap up, we want to make one announcement as I thank our panelists again. A couple of things. We want to make sure that you sign in tonight so that you can receive your non-duty time credit. And so Jeremy has posted the link in the chat, and there's also a QR code on the screen. So either one of those ways you can sign in for your credit. But also we want to keep this party going and remind you or tell you for the first time, if you haven't seen this flyer, that Rala Plus is launching tomorrow. It's the Richardson Association of Latino Administrators, Educators, and Allies. And so if you're on here and you're like, well, it doesn't say paraprofessional, you are the plus, honey. You are the plus. And so we want to make sure that you know you are invited to that space. Teachers, educators, however you identify in RISD as an educator, you are invited to the Rala lunch, and you are invited to join Rala. So again, it's tomorrow, 5 to 6:30, the PDC auditorium. I'll let you read the paragraph yourself on the flyer. The keynote speaker is Mrs. Debbie Renteria, who is a board of trustee here in RISD. And so please come out and join us. Come out and join us. We've been talking about finding our joy. So many people shared tonight that, feeling at home and wanting to be able to show up as your full self. You're going to do that tomorrow night. And you're going to have this affinity space ongoing after the Rala launch to surround yourselves with other Latino educators in a space curated just for you and allies, because I'm joined too, but I'm just going to be a silent member in the back. I'll just be silent and listen, but I do support Rala. I will be a paid member. And so come out and join, and that is tomorrow. Again, thank you for sharing your evening with us. We know it's a lot to ask in the evening after a long day of working and teaching and being on your feet. So we appreciate and honor the fact that you chose to share your evening with us tonight. Thank you.